Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about Guitar Tutor. This is a program that I wrote and which I use in pretty much every recording session that I have, every playing session. Every time I pick up the guitar or play the keyboard, this thing is helping me out. So basically over the course of the last 30 years, literally, every time I've had an idea of some feature that I wanted a computer program to help me with, I've just bundled it into this thing, and it's kind of evolved into a faithful old friend now. So let's have a quick look at some of the features. The first thing we need to talk about is the two fretboards. The top fretboard represents chords and the bottom fretboard represents scales. So this is my scale fretboard, and at the moment you can see it's displaying C major, and here we have all the various modes of the major scale. But if we have a look at just C major for the moment, you can see that the root note is red and all the other notes are blue, nice and simple. And I can view any of the various keys with these buttons here. All pretty straightforward stuff. Up above we've got the chord fretboard. So this is currently representing C major, but it can actually represent any chord that I want. If I want to have a look at an A add 9, that's what that looks like. That's all, again, pretty straightforward stuff. So you can see there's a secondary thing here. These are all the chords that I think you would most often want to see, but then there's some of the more exotic stuff down below. Each time I've found a chord that I wanted to be able to view, I've basically just added it to this list. So it's very bespoke. In addition to being able to select the chords with these buttons, and you can pick variations, so there's my sus4, or add notes in, there's a sharp 9 and a flat 13. These colours, by the way, for the rainbow, so it's the first note is red, then orange, yellow, green, blue, purple / indigo, violet, whatever you want to call it. So in addition to being able to do all that stuff, you can also click in this little box down here, and any of these notes any of these chord symbols are contained in the currently selected scale. So if we're looking at C major, these are the triad chords of the C major scale, and I can click in any one of those, and the upper chord scale board is updated to represent the E minor that I just selected. So each time we change scale, then this entire thing updates. So it's a really easy and fast way to get to the triads, sevenths and ninths variations of whatever scale we're currently looking at. Let's have a look at this stuff down below. What's this all about? Well, here we've got a text representation of the current scale, which, don't underestimate, I use this an awful lot, particularly this line here telling me where my flat notes are and my sharp notes. And so for any given scale, you can see that we're playing the second, the third, the fourth and the fifth, and that's all really straightforward stuff. But in any of the other scales, then we start looking at augmented fourths and flatted fifths and this kind of thing. You also get to see the notes that aren't in the scale in this pale grey. So if we're looking at one of the more exotic scales, like the harmonic minor scale, for instance, it's really easy to visually see that there's this whole tone interval here, one of the kind of defining characteristics of the harmonic minor scale. It's got a double semitone interval. Down below that, we've got some radio buttons allowing us to basically filter notes out of the scale fretboard. So if I click the triad radio button, now it's only displaying firsts, thirds and fifths. This is fantastic for kind of structural practice. Probably more interesting to a bass player than a guitarist, because you get to see this stuff. You talk about chord tones all the time. Firsts, thirds and fifths are really important. Speaking of bass guitars, I'll just kind of jump off this screen very quickly to tell you that you can actually configure it for a bass guitar. So we've just got some presets. You select the number of frets and the various strings, but these buttons up here are pre-configured presets that I've just basically programmed in. So if I wanted to do some bass guitar practice with my triad chord tones, then I would switch to the bass guitar view. And the 6-string guitar is the 23 fret Strat that I own, that's the basis of this application. But of course, you can change your root notes. If you were playing in an unusual tuning, then you can change any of the strings to any of the pitches, and that's all straightforward stuff. Then we move on to this highlighted area. So this is a practice thing where I can specify an area of the fretboard that I want to be highlighted in yellow. And then that's just a visual thing. So during practice sessions, I'll concentrate on those frets and ensure that all of the notes I play are within them. And I find that really helps focus my mind when I'm trying to learn fret names. But obviously, you can make the zone as big as you want if you like, and just slightly darker, kind of yellow for the 12th fret. Down below, we've got some text here that doesn't make very much sense in the context of a guitar fretboard. But if I switch over to keyboard mode, all of the functionality that I've talked about before applies to keyboards as well. So I can still click in any of these chords and we'll see the chords. I can obviously change modes, and that's all straightforward enough. And this is where the simplest key function comes in, because it tells me when I'm playing a keyboard what the fewest number of black keys is for whatever scale I'm currently selected. So if I want the easiest kind of white key only version of the scale with not having to contort my hands into weird shapes, this gives me a helpful hint and says, well, if you're playing in the Phrygian scale, then if you've got no other preference, then you might like to pick E, because E has no black keys. Down below, we've got a buffer of the last 10 scales that I've saved. So if I'm working in E Phrygian, I can store that scale, and now it remembers that scale is in my buffer. When I reload the application, the last 10 scales that I've stored will be recalled here. I can select any of them, click load, and it just recalls that scale for me. This button down here you saw earlier, that's how we toggle between keyboard and guitar mode. Then we've got this, there are 3 different sizes of the application. The application doesn't have scroll bars to try to save as much space as possible. But sometimes you want a smaller view, a smaller footprint. So you can go to medium mode, which throws away all of those options panes on the left hand side, and tiny mode, which basically just reduces you to a single scale fretboard. Switch back up to full size mode and back to medium mode again. So they just toggle around, and that functionality can also be accessed from a menu. If you're working on a small computer, this program has a big footprint. Guitar Tutor's it's about 1400 pixels wide, and your monitor might not be able to handle it. So you can always get to the various options from the left hand corner and go down to the smallest possible view. But to be absolutely honest with you, if you haven't got a monitor that isn't big enough to display the program in full size mode, you might struggle a little bit, because so much of the functionality in it is just intrinsically tied to having it in full size mode. So only when I know what I'm doing, I've picked my scale and I'm good to go, I don't need any of the other options, I'll shrink the size to just give it a smaller presence on screen. Let's have a quick look at some of the other tabs up here. We've already seen the strings and frets, and it's all pretty straightforward stuff. The circle of fifths is a pretty crude but helpful to me representation of the circle of fifths, and you can see the reason it looks a little bit weird is because it actually reorients itself depending on what mode I'm in. So D Dorian is actually the top of the circle of fifths, really, because it's all the white keys. And as you travel around the circle of fifths, it's exactly the same perspective. All I'm doing is just basically rotating all of those letters to keep the simplest version of the scale at the top. Chord builder is a big deal. I use this an awful lot. So if I enable the chord builder, it throws all the notes of the chord fretboard away, and now I can click anywhere in here, and whatever notes I've clicked, it will give me suggestions for each of the 12 keys that it could possibly be. If you're dealing with a chromatic scale and you clicked some notes on the fretboard, then there are actually 12 possibilities of chords that thing could be. So Guitar Tutor tells you what they all are. It might be a D minor 7 flat 5 or an F minor 6. You're always looking for the simplest variant. Some of these are like absolutely ridiculous and, you know, let's not go there kind of territory. We've also got this filter notes not in scale concept. So whatever scale I'm currently in, if we go back to C major for a moment and I select this option, then it's just going to give me C, D, E, F, G, A, B. There's no point showing me a possible chord that has a root that's not in my scale. That would be nonsense. I can click pretty much anywhere on the fretboard, but obviously it gets to the point where what human being could play that? You know, it's that kind of let's try and be sensible kind of thing. And each time I click on any one of these, it's just constantly updating. I can single click on an existing note to take them away, or press reset to throw everything away. Probably the single most useful feature in any of these left-hand panes is the key finder. So if I'm playing, let's say, an arpeggio, and it's got a C and a D sharp and an F sharp and an A, then Guitar Tutor gives me all of the candidate scales that those 4 notes could possibly fall in. Let's say it's based in C. So I can say, well, I know that I'm in the key of C, so only give me the variants that fall within those constraints, and there are the candidates that it could be. Something else that very commonly happens if you're working with a synthesizer is that you'll be working with intervals instead. I've actually lined up an example over here of this kind of thing. So we've got this sequence. Courtesy of the fabulous CS80. And we can have a quick look at the notes that are being played in this sequence and very quickly tally. You can see there's a +10 there. And each one of these, there's a +2. So there's a 10, a 2, and a 7. I can say to Guitar Tutor, I know it's in C, I just pressed a C. There's my C. But now I know that I'm dealing in 2s and 7s and 10s, and we obviously had a root. And those are all the scales that it could possibly be. Now, having come to that conclusion, and you've played that note on your arpeggio, you want to base a song off that, you think that's really cool, you want to do something with it. If these are your candidate keys, you can now, there's another feature in this ARP page over here, where we can find the other notes of the chromatic scale that play that arpeggio perfectly in the same key. So what we need to do in order to demonstrate this feature is pick one of these scales, and it can be completely random. I'll pick the natural minor scale, and I need to update my scale keyboard to reflect that I'm in the C natural minor scale. And behind the scenes, what Guitar Tutor's now done is calculated all the various legal notes that I can play that will play that pattern of intervals 0, 2, 7 and 10 and still be in key. So you need to choose your scale first and then head over into the ARP tab and find 0, 2, 7, 10. Here it is. So this middle column is your intervals. The leftmost column, by the way, is the notes of the scale that are represented. So that's the first note, the second note, the fifth and the seventh. But this is your intervals, your semitone based intervals. And it's telling me that I can play a C, an F and a B flat, and they'll all be in key. Let's try that. So that's the stuff you really need to know. There's a couple of other pages. Notepad, which is literally just it remembers every keystroke you type, and each time you open the application, it's just always there. Actually saves to the registry for every keystroke, so that's just a little convenient thing. Intervals is pure plain text, just stuff to help me out with a few mnemonics. There's a basic metronome in there as well. I very rarely use that, to be absolutely honest. That was a cool idea at the time, but it's been superseded by DAWs. I've recently started a brand new series where I'm actually recording myself practicing the guitar and chatting about various issues concerning alleviating the tedium of practice, shall we say. So you might want to check those videos out. Hope you enjoyed this one, and if you did, please consider subscribing. Hope to see you next time. Thanks a lot for watching.